The New Orleans Saints choosing to flip nearly their entire coaching staff gets an A as we grade off-season moves. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're grading some of the New Orleans Saints offseason moves. We're going to do a little bit of a series here, a few days this week, a few days next week, taking a look at different moves and giving grades. And we're going to go A through F here. And we're going to take a look at some of the different moves that passed and some of the different moves that didn't pass for the New Orleans Saints. We'll take a look at why the wide receiver room investments get a D. We'll take a look at why the young quarterbacks get a passing grade and why the New Orleans Saints, to kick everything off, flipping their offensive and defensive coaching staffs almost in their entirety, gets an absolute A for this offseason. We got all that and more coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time being here with us this time, making us your first listen and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just head over to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, the New Orleans Saints made a very good decision this offseason to completely transition their coaching staff on both sides of the football, a process that really began during the 2024 season. But I think the decisions that they made and the way that they went about not just settling for the status quo, which they absolutely could have done, was the right decision, and it gets an A from me in terms of one of the best offseason moves for the New Orleans Saints. Look, the Saints could have, after they moved on from Dennis Allen, they went to Darren Rizzi as the interim head coach. They could have kept Darren Rizzi. They could have kept him as the head coach. They could have removed the interim tag, made him the full-time guy, and then tried to extend that Sean Payton era in some way, with Darren Rizzi being the biggest kind of remaining thread or through line from Sean Payton to the New Orleans Saints. But they didn't take the easy way out when it came to that. In fact, they took a lot of risk waiting out for Kellen Moore, right? Because what if Kellen Moore would have said no? Then they would have ended up in a situation where they were probably hiring a one and done, and they would have been right back at trying to figure out their head coach situation next year. And so for New Orleans, they, I think, made the right decision to take that risk and to go ahead and forego the status quo. Now, do I think that Darren Rizzi would have completely maintained the status quo? No. My understanding from some folks that I've talked to that have knowledge of how those conversations went and everything like that, basically tell me that that Darren Rizzi and John Hendricks and I talked about this on the squad show last week, but that Darren Rizzi would have had a new offensive coordinator and would have had a new defensive coordinator. Guys like Lou Anarumo as well as Chip Kelly were kind of on the radar in those conversations. And so very likely the Saints still wouldn't have necessarily gone the status quo, but the idea of just completely turning the page on the Sean Payton era and through line, I think was the right decision, because now you're completely changing everything. You're changing the way that you go about practices. You're changing the way that you go about media availability. You're changing the way that you're going about your offensive and defensive coaching staff and your schemes and your systems, how you're teaching, what the attitude is, what the philosophies are, what the identity is. Everything's new. Everything's different. And one of the things that Dennis Allen would say pretty often was, if you keep doing the same thing and expect different results, that's a definition of insanity. And if the Saints would have done the same thing and expected different results, that's the situation that they would have been in. So this was the right decision, even down to not just the head coach change, but I think hiring Brandon Staley was a solid choice. I think he's a better defensive coordinator than he is a head coach, a la Dennis Allen. Yes, he had struggles as a head coach. I get it. I understand that. But what he did with those defenses was still pretty strong throughout his entire time. Now he doesn't have to split focus. He can go back to just focusing on the defense. One of the big question marks that Kellen Moore is going to have to answer is, can he split focus, be head coach, and also bring in and run that offense and be a play caller and game plan every week and all those other things? It's not easy to do. But if he gets that right, the Saints hit the jackpot with the NFL coaching cycle, because now they have a head coach who's their offensive play caller again. They don't have to worry about the offensive coordinator coming in, being successful and getting hired away because you went the CEO head coach route. Although the CEO head coach route has proven to be successful, but let's look at the Detroit Lions right now as an example. Dan Campbell, CEO head coach. He's not a play caller on either side of the football. Now he has to replace two head coach level coordinators, with Aaron Glenn heading over to the New York Jets, and then Ben Johnson taking his job with the Chicago Bears right across the division from Dan Campbell. Now, is Dan Campbell going to be able to hire the right folks to come in and keep that ship afloat as they have rebuilt that team literally plank by plank by plank over the course of the last 7 or 8 years? It's been an incredible thing to watch over in Detroit. And now the Saints are trying to go that same route, but they're doing it with the offensive play caller at head coach. So remember when Clint Kubiak and the New Orleans Saints had so much success in that opening 2-game win streak to open the season last year? What the conversation was? Oh my gosh, Clint Kubiak's going to get a head coaching job somewhere. I didn't think that was going to be the case, because Clint Kubiak doesn't necessarily have the head coach personality, but that's what the conversation was. And if that would have happened, then the Saints would have had to replace their offensive coordinator. Had things gone well in 2024, they still might have had to replace things. And so now they avoid that. You have the offensive play caller as the head coach, and you don't have to worry about getting hired in a head coach job somewhere else. You've got your guy. And so if he ends up panning out, which he has so far, I will say about Kellen Moore, then you're in a really, really good position if you're the New Orleans Saints. And so I think that that is a big part of all of it. The other thing are all of the other decisions that they made. Retaining Keith Williams, I think, was a really, really solid move as the New Orleans Saints wide receivers coach. I love the additions of a run game coordinator on offense and a passing game coordinator on defense. The splitting of the defensive line coach into defensive line coach and edges coach, with Jay Rodgers and Bo Davis, the reverse of whatever the reverse of respectively is in that. They're putting different focuses on linebackers, edge rushers, defensive line, making the communication a little bit more concise and more direct to the positions that those players play. It's a great way to go about rebuilding this coaching staff. We got to see if the results are going to be there in 2025, of course. But if the results are there, then I think that that's a good situation for New Orleans to be in. And you're in a better position here of at least trying something different. You'd rather fail trying something new than fail trying the things that have failed before. So I think that the New Orleans Saints are in a very, very good position here when it comes to their coaching staff and the decisions that they've made. Success or failure, they've made the right decisions. They've changed. They've gone away from the status quo. They've bucked the trends. They've gone away from what it is that they've done in the past. They have severed the ties to Sean Payton. Although there are one or two guys that still remain there, it's not the same. And it feels like they made a really good decision in Kellen Moore, who has driven the idea of community for this team, who has driven the idea of authenticity for this team, and who has brought the player coach approach back to New Orleans. I think all of that is positive in today's NFL. I will say that one other move gets an A for me, and I'm going to throw it in here because we've already discussed it before, but obviously getting $30 million back from Derek Carr's deal as he retired is huge. The New Orleans Saints right now sit about $24-ish million over the salary cap for next year. That is with the reduction of Derek Carr's dead cap for 2025, or 2026. And they currently sit with nearly $28 to $29 million of available cap space. So they'll be able to roll over some of that into 2026 and be in a really, really good, the best salary cap health kind of environment that they have been in, or situation they have been in many, many years. And so I think that getting that $30 million back was huge for them as well. All right, coming up next, I'll tell you what gets a B and what gets a C, starting off with young quarterbacks being the focus for New Orleans. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And summer sports are rolling right along. So whether you're enjoying baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or some high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is giving you everything you need to get in on the action all across the world of sports. And of course, you can get ahead on some things as well. The New Orleans Saints right now, 5.5 wins is the over-under. That's the win total projection for New Orleans. You think they're going to win 6 or more, 5 or less, you can get in on that. They also have some adjusted win totals as well, 3.5 and 7.5 that you can get in on. But on top of all that, I love to use FanDuel so I can track my favorite matchups. And of course, the app keeps everything fresh with new daily promos that you won't want to miss. Make sure you get in on all that. Same game parlays, live betting, a ton for you over there. And hey, if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open up the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, family, taking a look at what gets B and C grades from the New Orleans Saints offseason so far, leading off with the right decision being made around the young quarterbacks. The New Orleans Saints saw Derek Carr retire this offseason. It never felt like he was going to be a part of this team in 2025, one way or another. And then they made the right decision. They decided to roll with guys that were already in the room, young guys in Spencer Rattler and Jay Kaner, but then also went to the draft, did not trade up, did not get desperate, did not, do a whole bunch of stuff and give up a whole bunch of future assets to go up there and get a guy. And they went up there and they got Tyler Shough at pick number 40. Now I'm giving this a B because if you're desperate enough for a quarterback, that would have been, a Cam Ward or something like that, and you traded up to go and grab him, then maybe there's some room to bolster that up to an A, just specifically looking at quarterback. If you believe that he was your guy, all those other things. But the Tennessee Titans were never going to trade out of number 1. I actually like the fact that the Saints didn't trade out, but I am going to leave a little bit of a gap here because I guess in a certain sense, things could have been better, right? You could have gotten the best quarterback in the draft, right? There's always that possibility that would have been there or that was there or whatever, right? So I can't give it an A, but I can give it a B, which to me is kind of the maximum grade for this. I like the approach that the New Orleans Saints are taking at quarterback because of what we talked about all the way back before Derek Carr retired, before Derek Carr's shoulder started hurting, before the draft, before we knew anything about who was going to be the options at quarterback. My argument was that the New Orleans Saints and Derek Carr needed to split one way or another this offseason because when you bring in Kellen Moore and you say, here's your opportunity to build your team, then give him his quarterback. Not somebody else's quarterback. Not the quarterback that won't be around for another 2 seasons. Not the quarterback that was never going to be a part of this team's future, right? Derek Carr was going to be the quarterback of today had he made it into the 2025 NFL season. But he was never going to be the quarterback of the future for New Orleans. It was not going to happen. He was already past that point. He was in the twilight of his career anyway. That's kind of where things were with him. You were not going to be able to get 10 years of success, 5 years of success with Derek Carr and Kellen Moore. It wasn't going to happen. And so what the Saints did is what I wanted, when what I said that they should do, which is invest in the quarterbacks that can be your future. Build something. Spencer Rattler going into his second year. Now you got Tyler Shough going into his first year. Those are players that you can build something with. And on top of all that, Spencer Rattler, 5th round pick. So he gets a 5th round rated contract. Tyler Shough, 2nd round pick. So he gets a 2nd round contract. Now, there's stuff going on with all 2nd round contracts across the NFL, with the exception of linebacker Carson Schlesinger, as well as wide receiver Jaden Higgins, because those 2 guys got fully guaranteed 2nd round contracts. There was a bogus report that came out over the course of the weekend about how Tyler Shough is seeking a fully guaranteed 2nd round contract. No. Every 2nd round pick's representation is seeking a 2nd round contract. We have to get over this idea that Tyler Shough is walking into Mickey Loomis's office and saying, I want a fully guaranteed contract. No, absolutely not. Is Tyler Shough's representation not willing to not get a fully guaranteed 2nd round contract before somebody between picks 35 and 39 doesn't get a fully guaranteed 2nd round contract? 100%. Nor should they be. No agent, no representation worth a dime is going to get ahead of themselves in that situation. If picks 35, 36, 37, 38, and 39 all get fully guaranteed deals, then you go to the negotiating table and you either get the guaranteed deal or you don't for your client. But you don't, at pick number 40, say, don't worry about it. He'll take a half guaranteed deal or just the first year is guaranteed or the first year and half of the second year is guaranteed. When picks 35 through 39 haven't even signed their contracts yet. Like, this has to happen in order. You don't get ahead of that situation. So just a quick bonus on that. We always promise you some lagniappe. But I like the fact that the Saints have invested in their young quarterbacks. They didn't go out there and get a veteran quarterback that's going to take snaps away from them either over the course of the offseason. Like the entire offseason so far, 59 passes that we got to see as media. 59, 56, 56. So 63 total passes, 64 total reps that we got to see for quarterbacks and 9 on 7s or 7 on 7s. Oh, really? Not even that. Sorry, it would be double that. So it would be 128 total reps. 60 of them went to Tyler Shough, in which he threw 59 passes. 60 of them went to Spencer Rattler, in which he threw 59 passes. And then 4 of them went to Hunter Deckers, in which he threw 4 passes. That's allowing your young quarterbacks to compete. That's allowing your young quarterbacks to develop without introducing some veteran that's coming in that's going to be your third guy taking snaps and taking snaps away from the young guys that are competing for the starting role. So for me, this gets a B because to me, that's the highest that I can give this grade. Let's go to C real quick. Chase Young and his re-signed contract. Why do I give it a C? I actually think it's a good move, but I give it a C because it requires wait. It requires patience. We got to see what Chase Young's performance in 2025 looks like. We got to see what Chase Young's lifespan over the course of that contract or production over the lifespan of that contract looks like. 3 years, $51 million, up to $57 million with incentives. It's a good deal. It's a pricey deal. It's the biggest investment that the Saints made this offseason, though. Him and effectively Justin Reed were the 2 biggest contracts that they handed out. And they're not ridiculous deals. It's not $150 million to a 30-plus-year-old quarterback that's going to see less than half of that contract's lifespan. It's an edge rusher who proved that he could stay healthy for 17 games last year, who has invested in his own health, invested in his own body in a way that's not just what he's doing at the facility, but he's got like new equipment and all this other stuff that he's working with at home, these advanced sports science things that he's doing to make sure that he is healthy and ready to go for this 2025 season. It worked gangbusters for him in 2024, excuse me. And so he talked about it a little bit during his post-signing presser, I'll say, or availability, I'll say. And so I think that the investment in Chase Young is a smart investment, but I have to give it a C because we have to wait and sort of see where this goes, no pun intended. But we do have to wait and see, like, if he ends up being a double-digit sack leader for the New Orleans Saints, like we discussed in yesterday's episode, as a major breakout opportunity for him and the Saints, that ends up making this signing an A, right? And if you can continue to build around him as a fixture and cornerstone for your team in its future, that's an A. But right now, we'll call it a C. I like the move. I like the investment. It's a wise investment, but we have to wait and see what the production is that comes from it. Coming up next, the wide receiver room gets a D because the New Orleans Saints didn't invest in it the way that I thought that they would this off season. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints didn't address the wide receiver room the way that really anybody thought that they would with an extremely talented draft class in 2025. And that's why I give this one the grade of a D. I think that this wide receiver room is a talented wide receiver room. Chris Olave, 2,000-yard receiving seasons back-to-back as he opened up his career and was drafted into the NFL. Dealt with injuries last year, of course, but is looking to be healthy and go into 2025 and play in 2025 and do in 2025, succeed in 2025. The team clearly feels good about him as well. According to Jeremy Fowler over at ESPN, it was the Browns, and I already told you about the Pittsburgh Steelers reaching out, and the Saints turned both teams away. They clearly feel very good about where things are for Chris Olave going into his fourth season, and then, of course, that fifth-year option available in 2026, which has been picked up. Similarly, Rashid Shaheed gives you a lot of excitement. He's a home run hitter, can pick up yards in a hurry, can make you a take the top off the defense kind of a defense that alleviates, take the top of the defense type of offense that alleviates some of the pressure that a defense can put on you in the box, close to the line of scrimmage, in the run game, all those pieces. So it kind of allows you to be able to really open up what the dynamics of your offense look like. But health, still a conversation there. They go out there, they sign Brandon Cooks, health, a conversation there, but also very similar of a mold to Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. So clearly speed being the investment for this New Orleans Saints team. And they brought in Moochie Dixon as well as Chris Tyree, coming in as undrafted free agents as well. But the Saints didn't do what anyone expected that they would do at wide receiver. I mean, they were in position to make some solid draft selections over the course of this NFL draft and a very, very talented wide receiver class. Jaden Higgins was kind of out of the question for them. Tedero McMillan goes one pick before they make their selection. A guy like Isaac Tesla, the Detroit Lions trade up and take him one pick before the New Orleans Saints. Savion Williams goes off the board quickly before the New Orleans Saints were about to make a selection as well. So some of that was circumstantial and other teams just going up and getting their guys and getting ahead of the Saints to get their guys and all these other things. But I got to say, it was not what we expected in terms of the investment to go into that position room. And then they also haven't added yet that big physical body. They did that visit with Gabe Davis, 6'2", so not still just as tall as your tallest players at the position. Bub Means, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Cedric Wilson Jr., like these players are all 6'2", and so adding another 6'2" players, not really a 6'3", 6'4" kind of guy, but 225 solid blocker, can contribute for you as a run protector, but also as a pass catcher. Can have some of those big explosive games, but has to come back from that injury. Nick Underhill said on this show just a few weeks ago that October sounds like the timeline that his sources are telling him about when Gabe Davis would be ready. No rush when it comes to that then. And so New Orleans just hasn't really made the investments at wide receiver that we thought that they would. So I give the grade of a D there. No draft pick, no big body coming in. They're one of two teams in the NFL, according to Matt Paras, that have no receivers over 6'2" on their roster. And so maybe they're okay with that. They certainly sound like it. I've asked Keith Williams, New Orleans Saints wide receivers coach, about it. We've asked Kellen Moore about it, New Orleans Saints head coach and offensive play caller. We've asked TJ Paganetti about it, New Orleans Saints run game coordinator. And it seems that everybody's very comfortable with what this New Orleans Saints team has at the wide receiver position. So maybe we're blowing it out of proportion a little bit, but until we see these players pan out on the field and be able to be physical, be able to go out there and make some tough catches. And I'll give Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed a lot of credit. They have gotten better, much, much better when it comes to better and better and better and better each year when it comes to those contested catches, or as Keith Williams like to call them, combative catches. And so I think that that's a good thing for New Orleans. They have that confidence there, but we need to see it all pan out. We need to see it all work out. So I give the Saints a D right now when it comes to their wide receiver room. Not the wide receiver room, because I think there's talent in the wide receiver room, but the investment in the wide receiver room felt like the Saints missed some opportunities this offseason. I'll say it that way. And still some opportunities out there as well. All right, we're going to wrap this up with an F today. And I think Paulson Adebo getting away from this team, a bit of an F. I spoke the other day about how the Saints don't have a lot of players now that feel like they're not good fits for Brandon Staley's system. And I raised the question, like, what about that might have been true about Paulson Adebo? Like, was Paulson Adebo, like Peyton Turner was so clearly not a fit for New Orleans. Tano Passanio was a bit too tweener in terms of not really, him really only having like one place where he can contribute. But it certainly feels like Peyton Turner would have been out of sorts, right? And so the Saints let him walk. Paulson Adebo I have my questions about, right? Like, Paulson Adebo is a very good press man corner, but at Stanford, he played with scheme versatility. He did a lot of the zone work. He did a lot of the press man work. He did all those other things. He's a smart player too. And those smarts are huge when it comes to creating and understanding and learning and retaining the zone match rules, right? Dropping back in the zone to start, depending upon the way that the routes are developing off of the line of scrimmage for the offense, that tells you based on your rules and your understanding what it is that you have to do, where your responsibilities are, all those other things. Man eventually turns into zone, zone eventually turns into man, and then you're stuck to a guy, you're plastered to a guy. And Paulson Adebo absolutely has the smarts to do all of those things. He has the foundational, fundamental side of everything too. But I wonder if the penalties finally caught up there to where Brandon Staley was like, you know what, I'm good on that. I don't know. But it does feel like letting Paulson Adebo walk, or not letting him walk, right? Like, so this is a two-way street too, right? Like Paulson Adebo just might not have wanted to be in New Orleans anymore. Paulson Adebo maybe got more money going to New York than he was going to get in New Orleans. It certainly feels that way based on the money that New York had to spend versus the money that New Orleans did not have to spend. And New Orleans was clearly focused on other spots. They were going after Justin Reed. They were going after keeping Chase Young. They had that pursuit of Travarius Ward for a little while before he ended up in Indianapolis. And so maybe the Saints just didn't have what it took to keep him around. And so maybe this F is unfair, but I'm going to give it because I think that is a player that maybe still could have helped this defense. Maybe he wouldn't have been the fit that I think he could have been. I'm not sure. But man, just certainly feels like one of those players that, like, when you have that elite level of production at the football, you have that elite level of production at the catch point, that you probably want to keep that guy around. So I'm going to give the Saints an F there when it comes to that. We're going to do more of these. So tell me your grades for some of your different offseason moves for New Orleans. But coming up tomorrow, the Saints have really put a focus on investing in spring leagues, and they've done it again. We're going to break all of that down in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else on your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Know what the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.